Welcome to the Consultant's Way podcast, your go-to resource for all things professional services consulting. Brought to you by McMann and Anthony, a strategy consulting firm with over 30 years of experience helping B2B organizations achieve sustainable growth, and the Consultant's Way, the leading comprehensive consultant development program. Hosted by Dean McMann and Anthony Paluska, we share expert insights, firsthand experiences, and conversations with industry leaders on the topics that interest you most.
The views and opinions expressed by guests on this podcast are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of their employer, company, or affiliated organizations.
Hey, welcome back to the Consultant's Way podcast. You have Anthony Paluska and Dean McMann, and today we are joined by Mike Vazquez. Mike is Director of Professional Services at Avanti. And Mike, welcome to the show. It's great to have you. And just to kick things off, could you share a little bit about your role and your journey in professional services, and in particular, if you could, dive into a little bit about how your experiences have help shape your approach towards mentorship, which is a topic I know we want to spend some time on today.
Yeah, well, thanks guys for having me on. I really appreciate it. So I've worked in technology now for, I guess, close to 20 years, a little more than 20 years. Prior to that, I had a separate career, did something completely different. Well, we won't get into those details, but really I started in a couple of startups, and I worked in IT, like many of us start in some way or another. And inside those organizations, I was able to learn fairly quickly. And in one organization was a company called Avanti. And over the years, that particular company has really molded my career in a lot of ways and a lot of the thought processes that we have developed over time. As I learned the most I could possibly learn in the shortest amount of time at that one particular company. And it was really focused around the people. The people were always hire the best people, you get the best people, you get the best results. And that really kind of resonated with me throughout my career of just trying to get the right people and then build the right environments within companies. So that startup actually was very successful, was purchased by Symantec. And that's where I actually transitioned over into consulting and doing some professional services. And that was specific around data loss prevention. And data loss prevention at that time, Avanti actually created that space itself. Before that, there was no market around data loss prevention. And with that, the consulting portion of that really came down to how do we not only protect organizations with the technology, but how do we change their business processes? Because we're now discovering where their broken business processes really lied, and how do we make those changes? So from there, I actually moved to a partner company for a little while and then into Mobile Iron, which again was more about the security and management of mobile devices and eventually turned into UEM. And at that company, I really was the first professional services engineer hired into the company. Prior to that, there was two guys who were doing support and services, both. So really, through that journey, I was able to help build the team, build our processes. How do we deliver? And eventually became a manager there and moved through the ranks into a director position, managing other managers and building up that team over time. And that acquisition, well, we went public at one point to then go private and be acquired. And that acquisition was where I'm at now with Avanti. And Avanti then introduced a whole series of different products and different people into that. So currently, I have three managers who I work with and full team under that. And we're delivering all kinds of services from implementation, product, consulting, architecture, as well as ongoing renewable services. And this is probably the area that we align most with true consulting, as it's dealing with technology, but also the organization and how do we make them successful. So it's year after year kind of products and working with customers to help them with their services to be successful. Um, so that's kind of the big overview of where I'm at and how I got there.
Yeah, I mean, it's a wealth of different organizations, so different kinds of experiences that have sort of shaped you and how you bring this concept of mentorship and this attitude towards how you manage and grow your team. But before we dive into that topic, though, at all those different stops and as the market that you've operated in has evolved so much, as has customer expectations of Avanti or any of your previous organizations. Um, what are some of, or if any of the big changes you've seen in just professional services as an industry over your career?
In some ways, I don't know if there's that much a change. I think the products and moving into cloud services, that has helped streamline the path to delivering products. So what used to be, oh, we're going to show up and be on site for a week, now turns into we're going to do multiple sessions throughout a week, and we're doing everything remotely. And it may be, 4 hours worth of work with a customer or 2 hours worth of work. So those changes have certainly changed how we deliver, and just that speed of cloud services has forced us to kind of adapt in how we deliver services.
Yeah, lots of change, but at the same time, at the core, the what we're still doing and how we're still helping our clients and the problems that we're solving are very similar to your point. So Mike, I know the topic we want to spend some time on, and I've alluded to it a couple of times now, is this concept of mentorship. Um, you today you explained you work with both managers and technical team members. Just walk us through how you approach mentorship and the challenges that you face mentoring two very distinct groups, and how you think about your approaches differently, how you just make sure that you're providing the support that actually meets each of their unique needs.
Yeah. Okay. So this has definitely evolved over time. It wasn't just something we jumped out and did. Um, so when we onboard somebody, and this becomes a little bit, I'll explain why, I'm starting with how we onboard. So onboarding, we might start with training. Training, generally speaking, is really focused around technology. How do we get somebody up to speed with the technology? But it's not so much how do they actually deliver it. Um, we then sort of shift modes from we've done this technical training to now how do we do coaching? How do I sit on a call with somebody and coach them through how do we deliver the services? How do we make sure there's a consistent delivery model being used with our customers? And from there, I would say that first 3 months in most onboarding scenarios is really about the training. And then somewhere in between, that 6 week to 3 month period, it switches to coaching. And the coaching model could be, a manager, or it could be somebody senior or a senior consultant who's doing that work. And mentoring sort of steps in beyond that. How do we actually start working on their consulting skills and have a long-term journey, and what does their career path look like? So a lot of this becomes the discussion of what is your career path and how do we then fine tune that to hone your skills to meet those goals. So that's kind of how I look at the whole mentoring journey itself. Um, Now, when we talk about onboarding somebody new, it's kind of easy in the sense of we know that you're coming in, learning the technology, starting to get coached in how do you deliver the services. And then we start having this conversation of, well, where do you see yourself in 4 years? What do you want to be doing? Do you want to be still doing, consulting and services? And is that the right role for you? Do you want to get into being an SE? Do you want, a role in management someplace? So how do we start building that path and then looking at those skills, how to get you there? Um, and that translates into the delivery model that people use and their skills and their communication. As examples, they may not know how to really build a PowerPoint presentation, and working through that process of how do we teach somebody to build a PowerPoint, but also present it. So this could start as something as here's the architecture we're going to build, and Mr. Customer, here we're going to deliver these things, and really starting to train them. That then translates later on into their role of becoming an SE and being able to talk through those things. And so it's that career journey that we talk about and how do we work with people. Managers, it's a little bit different in the sense they've already made that decision. They want to become a manager and have become a manager. And I tend to focus more on how do I help them become better mentors for the rest of the team. So I don't have to go and mentor every person, but I have a team that then helps mentor each other and grows exponentially in that sense.
You know,
Hopefully that
I like the
makes sense.
combination of, um, and we really believe in developing PS people. So we're very excited about what you're talking about. I like the combination that you've got to have learning, training, and then you've got to have someone with some experience actually mentoring you into actualizing and making those habits. Because it can be, particularly in technical people, it can be a very different thought process. Why would I just want to get in and do my activity and get out, right?
Right.
And I prefer nobody to talk to me, right?
Of course.
And go ahead.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And this is where we get into that sort of coaching and mentoring kind of model of the coaching is, tends to be more tactical of like it's about the technology. The mentoring tends to be more about, well, how do you talk to a C-level executive? If you're nervous just talking to a manager, how are you going to go talk to an executive and explain what you've done? And if you're in the technical weeds and can't translate that into what the business outcome is, there's a big gap. And how do we get you to that? And that's really that mentoring process that really helps people develop those skills. And a lot of this is what we're really talking about is consulting skills as opposed to technology. I mean, you can take the smartest person in the world who knows all about the technology, can write the code, but if you can't talk to the customer, he's not going to be a very good consultant.
We always talk about bring the customer with you, right? Project what's going to happen so they know where the challenges are. Take them to the middle, say, "Here's where we are, here's what we need from you." Take them to the end. And talking to your point, talking to executives is different than talking to anybody else because they are used to certain rhythms, right? They like top-down communication. They like to ask questions. They have more conversation and less presentation, and that's different than everything else they experience. We love that you're doing all this. This is really great.
And this is also what's really great about what you guys are doing is a lot of the things that you were trying to teach people, you have that content. You're already putting it out there and what you guys offer for people. So it's really fantastic to see because it you don't get a lot of that out there. I mean, you have to kind of make it up on your own, and there's not too many places that we find this. So
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
I definitely appreciate that.
Well, we're very tell me a little bit, if you don't mind, or tell all of us a little bit of, as you've done all this, and particularly through the COVID journey, um, strange or funny or odd things you had to deal with. Now, and I always want you to know I love your haircut. Okay, that's a
Oh, well, yeah.
no, it's just a
Well, we go to the same
super
barber.
premium.
I know we're not next to each other, but it's the same place.
Clearly, yeah, I've adopted you somewhere along the way.
No, really, we're not related.
Really, this is not my son, and that's not my bike. So, anyway, fun things that have happened along this gratuitous road.
So, I'll start with, the whole COVID era thing, and, that was really threw a lot of people for a loop. Now, what was really interesting is my journey with Mobile Iron. It was started out of Yeah, I'm in the office a few days a week, but we're a mobile company. Most of the people are remote. At one point in time, I don't think I had anybody or maybe one person in my entire team that was even in my state. They weren't in offices. So we built a culture of working remotely to begin with. So when COVID came around, we from a services point of view, we were just firing on all cylinders. It didn't phase us at all. I mean, it was more about for us, like in our downtime, getting out and going and doing things that, like many people else, but being sort of stuck at home was no different to us. Now, what was really funny is the executives for the company were really struggling with that idea of working remotely. And we saw that more and more from customers. And so, in some ways, we were able to kind of help coach them on how to do that. And how do you keep your one on ones and keep people motivated and talk through that journey. So, that was really a different kind of experience for us of it was a completely different level of consulting that we ended up doing at that point in time.
Yeah, in the consulting businesses, we grew up where everybody's traveling all the time, and your management and how you track people, which is totally different than I can see them in the office, right? So when those things happen, we were different. But like you, we ended up having projects helping clients figure out how not to have people on calls all day long just to make sure you can see them, how not to irritate them, but to let them work, how to know if they're being productive. So similar to you, and I bet that is a theme that went across a very broad group of people who were already used to distance management.
Yeah. Well, and I, honestly, with services, it's pretty easy to kind of tell if somebody's doing their job, they're billing time. I mean, it's it's very tangible what the utilization is. So, in some of the ways, this started really becoming a conversation of right. How do you measure effectiveness in a company? And so, what's the output? What are people? I'm not concerned. Of people producing and getting things done. My general concern typically has been how much are you doing, and do we need to scale it back? Are you burning yourself out? Those become my concerns of how are you managing your stress if you're working 50, 60 hours a week. How are you managing that, and how can we dial back that load? um, so those would be the concerns I was getting during that period of time. And I think that translates to a lot of businesses when they're working remotely. What is the output? What is the goals? What are you seeing? And keeping those things tangible of how you're measuring success makes it easier to understand what's happening.
Yeah, and it's a nice segue back into a topic you were touching on just a little bit ago, which is right this concept of one of the biggest risks that we have as leaders is when one of our team members is reaching that point where they're burning themselves out and they're stretched too thin because they lose the patience to do the job effectively and the willingness to show up every day with the right attitude, and that hurts clients, that hurts them, that hurts their long-term potential with us. So I'm sure that fits into your kind of your mentorship and even your coaching framework and methodology is something that you're always working with your team members on trying to make sure that they're balancing those things. Um, talk a little bit about these situations where okay, we can see really glaringly that somebody's running way too hot for a period of time, and that's an urgent need that needs to be addressed. Versus you're working with somebody else on something that's much more long term, strategic, needs a lot more time and focus. How do you balance the urgent versus the kind of the long term strategic needs of somebody else in your how you spend your time coaching and mentoring your team?
And some way, you kind of have to, I wouldn't call it triage, but you have to assess, um, the urgency of, is somebody having that their burnout and that they need a break, and how do we adjust that? One thing that I really like about this mentoring model and kind of you're a lot more connected to somebody, and they're much more willing to open up and tell you what's really going on as opposed to, oh no, I'm fine. I can keep going, and it's it's not that. We need to make sure people are really looking at this as a long-term thing, not just how fast can I go for how long until you collapse. Um, so we have to kind of assess that. When I've used a couple of kind of open-ended questions to kind of assess where people are, and usually, are you dreaming about work, right? There's always the if you're dreaming about work, you are way too over the line, and there's got to be something that we dial back. Whether it's less projects or getting people to assist and kind of trying to balance that workload. And it's okay to, even just say, "Hey, for customers, I know you wanna get this up and running and you just were sold a package, but we are 6 weeks out from delivery, and we can't deliver before that, and we can't keep squeezing things in and compressing that time level to make everybody successful." Um, so we have to kind of balance that versus that long-term kind of goal of long term in some ways becomes less urgent, but you can find that rhythm of how do we consistently keep working on things and keep rolling forward. The problem that you can have though with that consistent kind of timeline, particularly if an urgent thing gets in the way, is, oh, well, we're just going to push out our meeting 1 week and start pushing out those timelines for that person. And so we have to be very diligent about staying in time and keeping those communications going and keeping the work going. If we're not providing them with new things to learn, new things to do, and having just one on ones and conversations about what they're doing, it gets a little stagnated. And so we have to just make sure we keep focusing on forward movement. Hopefully that gives you a good idea of how I think about it. It doesn't always work in practice, and but we do our best in that sense.
But being deliberate about it,
Yes.
to your point, is really important, right? Being able to triage those situations and not and make sure that we're addressing those things that are urgent, but not losing sight or letting that get in the way of making sure that we're working those strategic issues with those that have the long-term potential and neglecting those people as part of the process. So keeping that balance and being cognizant of that at all times. I mean, I appreciate your answer there. I think that is a really important reminder for everybody.
One thing, Mike, that I when we're helping people figure out the work-life balance, I always try to get them to also look at and there's no doubt that we don't want people working too hard but I want them to look at their efficiency, right? And it'd be easier for me because I've been doing this a long time, but I, you can have good life balance or you can improve your balance if you don't do things that don't need to be done, right?
Yes.
Begin things right away, right? There's just a lot of things you don't over worry about it. There's some methods that we can, as you say, mentor people into that can help them be efficient and therefore enjoy the job more, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
not
Absolutely.
make it such a burden.
Yeah. Well, and there's simple things that we can talk about doing, and it's easy for people to get into a email back and forth with a customer where your customers, hey, I got a quick question. Okay, yeah, I can quickly respond to that. We didn't have time scheduled. We weren't going to work with that customer, but that then starts turning, well, I got another question, or can you explain this to me? And then it turns into this back and forth. And before you know it, you've spent a lot of time in one day answering questions going back and forth versus, hey, can this wait? Is this urgent? We have another meeting scheduled in 3 days. Can we wait until that meeting? And, or is there an issue that we need to address sooner? And just phrasing that email back to them versus this back and forth, and you're spending a lot of time and then stressing about what you're writing, how you're communicating, and getting the right details to the customer. Sometimes it's easier to pick up a phone and just
Yes.
have a quick conversation, and people forget that. Um, this is an area that, it's easy. Should we just have a quick call to discuss this? Because I can spend, let's say, 5, 10 minutes with somebody, have a phone call versus, you know, a series of emails going back and forth in one day that add up to 45 minutes out of my day. And then you're stressed about having 2 or 3 customers do that to you in a day, and while you're trying to work with other customers. Um, so we gotta figure out how to balance those things out.
Mike, I really think that and one thing you said is the little things matter. There's a lot of little things we can do and making good habits out of them. But this whole email chain thing, Anthony and I have talked a lot about this with people who join us from corporations. And Anthony, you correct me if I'm wrong, almost always, if you send us an email that's anything complex, we're going to call you right away, right? Because you can't get a three-dimensional conversation going in a two-dimensional thing. And our belief is if it's worth doing, let's do it right now. Or we can put it in a time slot that we're going to communicate, as you said. But we just see a lot of wasted time because people think it's efficient, but it's not really efficient.
Right. Right. Oh, and, email's easy, right? I just type it and send it, and it's done. I I will admit, just wholeheartedly, I am not a fantastic writer. That is not one of my, best skills in the world. But I spend a lot of time sort of thinking, and I shouldn't say I spend a lot of time writing, but thinking about how I can be concise with what I do message. I don't want to write paragraphs of information that you get the same outcome that you guys just described of, well, I'm just going to pick up the phone call and call you because I didn't understand it. It's this complex idea. And for me to write paragraphs or pages on a complex idea to then pass it across to a customer who goes, "Can we get on a phone call?" I'd rather be more
Yeah,
concise.
you've just doubled your
Yeah,
effort.
exactly. I'd rather be more concise, a few sentences, maybe a paragraph that is clear of, "Here's the overview. We should get on a call and talk about the details." That's that's what I like to do, and it seems to work more effectively for everybody.
And then that call can have the context can be set in advance, and it can have a very clear goal, and purpose of the phone call, and you can make that phone call efficient as well. Because I'm sure you've seen it, we see it all the time, where phone calls also become another trap where I'm going to schedule a 30-minute meeting for something that could have been a 7-minute conversation, and because it was 30 minutes, we find a way to fill that time, and all the real decisions get made in the last 3 minutes of that conversation anyway. So I like the approach that you've laid out there, and we employ something similar, which is give me the background and the context via email or in a written form so that it's asynchronous, right? And then let's discuss it where we actually need to have that conversation. But now our conversation isn't storytelling, it's
Yeah.
problem solving.
This is an area where I definitely see people, from my team. Some people are fantastic writers. Um, they love to write, but when you write paragraphs and, I've seen status reports where it's pages of a status report, and a lot of that could be boiled down to smaller stuff, and they didn't need to put that much effort into it. Doesn't mean that they don't need to, put effort into it, but we can be more concise with the information that provided. And then I see the other end of the spectrum, somebody who's very technical, who writes the technical things down, but doesn't give enough information of how the pieces fit together from telling a story. So we have to find that right balance, and that, oftentimes is part of where that mentoring really comes in of how are you communicating with your customers? How are we writing things? How are we putting status updates together to be effective? And I mean, I know people who are spending 45 minutes on these things that could be 15 minutes worth of work.
How does it align to your skill set? How does it align to the purpose of what you're trying to communicate? And how does it align to how the communicator, or I'm sorry, how the receiver of information needs to receive that? Because sometimes they won't be able to understand or digest all of the technical information in written form. And sometimes they're more auditory anywhere. Sometimes they're kinetic learners and thinkers, and they have to talk it out and work it no matter what. So all the effort that we put into it, even if that's your natural gift, which is written communication, you might still find yourself having to do something else anyway. And so making sure you align the three, your style, the purpose of the actual message, and then what the receiver actually, how they need to hear it will be, those are, I think that's a good lesson for everybody.
Yeah. This sort of reminds me of, Chris Voss's book, Never Split the Difference. Who who is the recipient? What is the tone of a message, right? So whatever you write the tone of the message to be, it may not be what the recipient hears, because it's really about what the recipient is already, what the tone of that message is how that recipient interprets that and feels it. Not what you intended it to be, but what they have. And that could be that their boss just yelled at them, and so they're in a bad mood, and they just took that tone of how it was written to them as bad, as opposed to it was you intended all this great information that was really good, but because they were in a bad mood after being yelled at, and they were had fear for their boss yelling at them or is going to fire them for something, they interpret all of these things poorly. And so we always have to balance that of how clearly you're writing things and trying to make it very non-emotional, if you will.
Yeah, you thought you were being concise, they thought you were being short, right? And then and now you're in a bad
Yeah.
situation, right? Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
So, Mike, I'm going to ask you to give us a couple of takeaways. This has been really great. I will say one thing. We're on that topic. My father told me when my parents moved away when I was going to college to Kenya, and my father said, "I'm going to leave you a piece of advice, son. All of life is not about you; it's only about the other people." And that was it. And he was a very concise speaker too. And that was it. There was no there was no follow on. It was like, and good life, buddy. So listen, Mike, give us a couple of takeaways. This has been very exciting. We love hearing about all the things you've done with your people through the whole journey of onboarding and then coaching and mentoring. So just a couple of things you'd like us all to remember.
I would say the biggest thing that I always kind of take away is it's about the people. It's about what you are providing and working with your team to do. If you can help level them up and keep them growing, that benefits not only your customers, but the entire organization will become more successful. If you invest in your people, you invest in the company. And I I truly believe that. The more time I've invested in people, the better they have been at delivering services, but also being able to move on to other things that benefit, hopefully my company that I'm working with, but they've really made other careers. I've had people who've come in and move into management roles. I've had people move to SE roles, and they it was a stepping stone into what they wanted to do, and they've all been very successful what they've went on to do. I've had people become project managers and go to startups. Some people have moved to very large organizations and built careers there. So I think if you invest in your people, it pays dividends for everybody.
Well said. It's the greatest ROI on your time and investment that you can make on anything else. So when people say we don't have the time, we don't have we're not focusing on developing our people, then we know they're looking at it wrong. Because to your point, if you do it and you focus on that, the dividends pay off way more than the investment that goes into that. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
We appreciate you joining us today. Appreciate you giving us a couple of key thoughts and concepts. I know there's a lot more we probably could have gone into and covered, and we'll have to do that next time we get you on here. But for now, we appreciate the time that you did get to spend with us, and we'll talk to you next time.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I really appreciated being here. Enjoy talking with you guys. So thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I thought Mike was one, just a joy to be around. I've actually had the opportunity to be with Mike in person out in the West Coast, but um, so focused on his people and so caring about the getting them successful, balancing their work life, thinking through the consultative skills. that they need, and then applying some, and even through a shout out to the work we do, which was really kind. But I thought that was really good. I look forward to having him back to dive into, mentorship a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, obviously really passionate about anybody that is that committed and invested in developing their people in all aspects of it. I liked the approach and the way to think through it. We kind of do something similar at our firm, although probably never structured it with the labels that he used. But it's this concept of, okay, you initially get onboarded and you go through a training phase of just getting to know and understand the things that are needed to make you baseline successful in your role. And then you shift into coaching, which is my interpretation from Mike was right. That is hands-on support of helping to make sure you can do the job that you're in today. And that's the role that a leader shifts into. And then once you're operating and functional there, we start looking ahead of where do you want to take your career and where do we go from here? That's when it shifts into mentoring and having somebody and having an organization that connects those dots and sees that entire journey for you. If you're working at Avanti and you're working for Mike, you're in a good place because they are going to take you through that arc and focus not just on making you successful right out of the gate, but also making sure that whether it's with them or somewhere else, you're well positioned for your career.
Yeah, that's very true. Very caring about people's career path. So we'll have Mike back, and reach out to him, ask questions. Please be an aggressive participant, and so take us home, Anthony.
All right. If you like what we or Mike said during this, and if you enjoyed some of the other ones, check this out, or like and subscribe on YouTube or your podcast channels. Check Dean or I out on our LinkedIn's. Connect with us there. Feel free to share thoughts or suggestions for future guests or future topics that we cover. And you can also reach out to us at podcast@consultantsway.com if you want to get a hold of us that way. So thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.